In ancient Greece, a tale unfolded. It was a story of gods, mortals, heroes, and monsters. This was Hellas, a collection of independent city-states. In this landscape, two great powers would rise, Athens and Sparta. In times of crisis, they fought side by side. They stood together against the Persian Empire. But this unity was temporary, a pause in a deeper story of rivalry, a story that would define an era. Their homes were not so far apart. Athens was open to the sea and new ideas. Sparta was isolated and suspicious of the outside world. This difference set them on two completely different paths. Athens was the eagle, soaring on creativity and intellect. They gathered in the agora to debate politics and invented democracy, where citizens ruled. Athens was a beacon of culture. Sparta was the wolf, lean, disciplined, and deadly. Every aspect of Spartan life created the perfect army. From birth, Spartans were molded by the state, trained to endure pain and obey without question. Sparta was a fortress of order. The Athenians built with marble and ideas, their legacy, tragedy, comedy, history, and philosophy. The Spartans built with flesh and bone, their legacy and the legend of their courage. How could two such different cities exist so close to one another? Their differences were not just matters of policy, they were matters of soul. Athens was an open society. It welcomed foreigners, new customs, and strange ideas. Its economy was based on trade, its power on the sea. The city was a noisy, chaotic, and vibrant place. It was always changing, always evolving. Athenians believed that progress and innovation were the keys to strength. They saw the world as a place of endless possibility, a place to be explored and understood through reason and debate. They were confident, ambitious, and often arrogant. Sparta, in contrast, was a closed society. It was deeply suspicious of outsiders and their corrupting influence. Foreigners were rarely allowed to visit, and Spartans were rarely allowed to travel abroad. Their economy was based on agriculture, worked by a subjugated population of Helots. Their power was entirely on land. Sparta was a quiet, orderly, and unchanging place. They believed that tradition and obedience were the keys to survival. They saw the world as a dangerous place, a place to be controlled and defended through military might and unwavering discipline. They were cautious, conservative, and fiercely proud. These opposing worldviews were bound to clash. It was inevitable. Athens saw Sparta as a backward, brutal, and tyrannical state, a place where freedom was crushed and human potential was wasted. The Athenians looked at the Spartans with a mixture of fear and contempt. They saw them as an obstacle to their own ambitions, a dark shadow threatening to dim their bright and shining city. To the Athenians, Sparta represented everything they had fought to overcome: ignorance, oppression, and fear of the new. They were the past, and Athens was the future. Sparta saw Athens as a decadent, chaotic, and unreliable city, a place where discipline was weak and morals were loose. The Spartans looked at the Athenians with deep distrust and envy. They saw their growing empire as a direct threat to their own security and way of life. They feared the spread of Athenian democracy, which they believed would stir up rebellion among their own oppressed people. To the Spartans, Athens represented a dangerous and corrupting force, a disease of ideas that threatened to infect all of Greece. The stage was set for a conflict that would tear their world apart. In Sparta, life began with a judgment. There was no warm welcome, only a cold, hard inspection. When a Spartan baby was born, it was taken to a council of elders. The elders examined the infant carefully, looking for any sign of weakness. Was the baby strong? Did it have the potential to become a warrior? If deemed fit, the baby was returned to its family. But if the council found any defect, the verdict was death. The infant was left to die, exposed to the elements. This practice was seen as a duty to the state. From the very first day of life, a Spartan learned that their existence belonged to the state. Spartan mothers were instructed to raise their children with a firm hand. Babies were bathed in wine, taught not to cry, and often left alone to develop self-reliance. The goal was to eliminate weakness from the very start. They learned that emotion was a weakness, and that pain was a teacher. It was how they forged the human weapons that would make their city legendary. At the age of 7, a Spartan boy's childhood ended. He was taken from his family, and honestly, he would not live with them again for more than 20 years. He was enrolled in the agoge, the state-sponsored training program that would dominate his life. This was more than a school. It was a crucible. It was designed to systematically strip away individuality, fear, and softness, and replace them with obedience, discipline, and a peerless fighting spirit. The boys were organized into packs, living together in barracks under the watchful eye of older instructors. Their new family was the state, and their only purpose was to become a warrior. Life in the Agoge was a relentless test of endurance. The boys were given minimal food, forcing them to learn to steal to survive. If they were caught stealing, they were beaten severely, not for the act of stealing, but for the incompetence of being caught. This taught them cunning, stealth, and resourcefulness. They were made to walk barefoot in all seasons, toughening their feet. They wore only a single thin cloak year-round to build resistance to cold and heat. They slept on beds of reeds, which they had to gather themselves from the riverbank without a knife. Every moment, really, was a lesson in hardship. The physical training was constant and brutal. They practiced wrestling, boxing, running, and throwing the javelin and discus. They were pushed to their physical limits and beyond. Fights between the boys were encouraged, as this was seen as a way to weed out the cowards and build a tolerance for violence. They were whipped publicly in annual rituals at the altar of the goddess Artemis Orthia, a test of courage where showing pain was the ultimate disgrace. Some boys even died during this ritual, but their deaths were seen as a failure of spirit, not a failure of the system. But the Agoge was not just about physical toughness, it was about psychological conditioning. The boys were taught to speak only when necessary, using few words. This concise, blunt style of speech became famous as laconic, named after their homeland of Laconia. They were taught absolute obedience to their superiors and unwavering loyalty to their comrades. They learned to think not as individuals, but as part of the phalanx, the great wall of Spartan shields. The Agoge was a factory that took boys and forged them into living weapons, each one identical, unbreakable, and utterly devoted to Sparta. At 20, a Spartan graduated from the Agoge, now a full-blown soldier. He joined a Sicilian, a dining club of 15 men, his new family. They fought, ate, and if necessary, died together. Acceptance required unanimous vote. Rejection meant disgrace. This bond fostered loyalty, making the phalanx nearly unbreakable. A Spartan fought for the man next to him, his messmate. Duty lasted until 60, dedicating his life to war. He didn't work, farm, or engage in commerce, but honed his skills as a soldier. Sparta unleashed full-time killers. Marriage was secondary. The state, barracks, and brotherhood came first. Spartan women stood apart in Greece, educated, athletic, and outspoken. They managed estates and wielded real economic power while men trained for war. Their freedom, however, was built on the backs of the Helots, a subjugated people forced to farm and serve the Spartan elite. Helots vastly outnumbered Spartans, fueling constant fear of revolt and shaping the city's harsh, militarized society. The Krypteia, a secret police of young Spartans, terrorized the Helots, even killing those deemed a threat. Every year, Sparta declared ritual war on the Helots, making their murder legal. The entire Spartan system, its discipline, its leisure, even the famed independence of its women, depended on this brutal oppression. The cost of Spartan utopia was paid in chains and blood. The freedom of the few rested on the suffering of the many. In Sparta, strength and liberty for citizens meant relentless control over others. The legacy of Sparta is inseparable from the darkness beneath its glory. In Athens, life began in the family, not under the state's gaze. The city's openness to trade and ideas made it a vibrant cosmopolitan hub. Athens embraced innovation, debate, and diversity, qualities that fueled its creative spirit. Its greatest invention was democracy. Any adult male citizen could speak, vote, and serve in government. This radical self-rule demanded active participation and fostered a fiercely independent, argumentative citizenry. Athenians believed their freedom made them strong, superior to both Persian subjects and Spartan soldiers. Public debate, persuasion, and pride in liberty defined the Athenian character. Democracy was their guiding star, but also a source of hubris. Athens was a city where ordinary people shaped their own destiny. The experiment in self-government would change the world, but its freedom was always fragile. The Agora was Athens' beating heart, a marketplace of goods and, more importantly, of ideas. Here, citizens argued politics, philosophy, and art surrounded by the noise of commerce and debate. Socrates might challenge a passerby on justice, politicians rehearsed speeches, news, and rumors spread like wildfire. The agora was where Athenians learned, taught, and shaped their city's future. In Athens, every citizen was expected to have an opinion and defend it in public. This open exchange fueled intellectual breakthroughs in philosophy, drama, and science. In stark contrast, Sparta had no such space, no public debate, no marketplace of ideas. Spartan life was regimented and silent. Athenian life was noisy, public, and free. The agora embodied the essence of Athenian liberty to assemble, to speak, to think. Here, democracy was lived every day. While Sparta forged warriors, Athens cultivated minds. Boys learned reading, writing, music, and physical fitness, preparing for life as active citizens, not soldiers. Rhetoric was prized. Persuasion was power in the assembly and courts. This intellectual focus sparked a cultural explosion. The Parthenon, epic poetry, theater, and philosophy. Athenians questioned everything: fate, justice, the nature of truth. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle debated in the streets, laying the foundations of Western thought. Comedy and tragedy flourished, reflecting a society unafraid to examine itself. The examined life was the Athenian ideal, a sharp contrast to Spartan obedience. Athens' legacy is a testament to the power of free inquiry. The Athenian household was ruled by the male head, while women lived secluded, managing the home and raising children. Unlike Spartan women, Athenian women received no formal education and were expected to remain invisible in public life. Their virtue was measured by modesty and silence. Slavery underpinned Athenian society. Slaves did the labor that freed citizens for politics and art. This was the city's great contradiction, a democracy built on the backs of the enslaved. Only adult male citizens held political power. Women, children, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. The social hierarchy was rigid, with freedom reserved for a privileged few. Athenian democracy was revolutionary, but its membership was exclusive. The liberty of the citizen depended on the subjugation of others. Athens was a city of brilliance and of limits. Sparta and Athens embodied two irreconcilable visions of government. Sparta was an oligarchy power held by a small elite, led by two kings and a council of elders. The system prized order, tradition, and obedience. The individual served the collective. In Sparta, citizenship meant being a soldier, a cog in the state's war machine. Athens was a democracy power in the hands of the many. Every citizen could debate, vote, and serve. Leaders were chosen by lot. The system was dynamic, chaotic, and celebrated individual potential. In Athens, citizenship meant participation, dissent, and personal liberty. The highest value in Sparta was order. In Athens, it was freedom. These systems were fundamentally incompatible. Each saw the other as a threat. Their rivalry would shape the fate of Greece. The divide between Sparta and Athens grew from a chasm in their core values. For Sparta, the ideal human was a warrior, with courage, discipline, and obedience. The shield was the ultimate symbol, victory or death. For Athens, it was a well-rounded, thoughtful citizen. The greatest virtues were wisdom, creativity, and civic responsibility. The mind was the center of their universe. These conflicting values shaped their societies. The Spartan education system suppressed individuality, while the Athenian system cultivated it. This clash created a deep suspicion. They were not just competitors, they were moral opposites. Section 3. Clash of Arms, the whale versus the elephant. The military power of Sparta and Athens reflected their different geographies and values. They were masters of different domains of warfare. Sparta was the master of the land. Its power was its army of hoplite soldiers who trained for war from childhood. Athens, on the other hand, was the master of the sea. Its power was its navy of fast warships called triremes. With its navy, Athens controlled the sea lanes and protected its vast trading empire. The city's long walls connected it to its port, turning Athens into a fortified island. This strategic difference created a fundamental military stalemate. The Spartan army could ravage the Athenian countryside, but could not break through the long walls. The Athenian navy could raid the Spartan coastline, but could not march inland. This military opposition would define their long and destructive conflict. This military divergence also revealed their different approaches to power. Sparta's power was conservative and defensive. Athens's power was expansive and aggressive. Section 4. Two views of the world: philosophy of life and death. The rivalry between Sparta and Athens was a philosophical one, a conflict over the purpose of human life. The Spartan philosophy was simple: serve the state through discipline and obedience. The Athenian philosophy was more complex: flourish as an individual through intellectual inquiry and freedom. Their views on death were also polar opposites. For a Spartan, a noble death in battle was the highest achievement. For an Athenian, death was a tragedy, the silencing of a unique voice. The Athenians died for the love of their city, a place that they believed made life truly worth living. Section 1. A fragile alliance: the Persian Storm. The first great test of the Greek world came from the east. A shadow was stretching across the Aegean Sea. It was the Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever known. Under King Xerxes, the Persians sought to expand their dominion, swallowing the small, bickering Greek city-states. This threat forged a bond between Athens and Sparta, who stood together. The first invasion was met at Marathon, where the Athenian army won a stunning victory. 10 years later, the Persians returned, led by King Xerxes with a massive army. At Thermopylae, Leonidas and his 300 Spartans made their legendary stand, buying time for Greece. The Persians broke through and burned Athens, but the people had evacuated. At Salamis, Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into a trap, and the Greek ships won a decisive victory. The Spartan sacrifice and Athenian victory saved Greece. The defeat of Persia was a moment of triumph for all of Greece. But it was Athens that emerged from the war with the most power and prestige. Their city was in ruins, but their navy was supreme, and their reputation was soaring. They quickly formed the Delian League, an alliance of city-states around the Aegean Sea. The stated purpose of the league was to continue the war against Persia and to protect its members from future invasion. Each member city contributed either ships or money to a common treasury, which was kept on the sacred island of Delos. At first it seemed like a noble and necessary alliance of equals. However, Athens soon began to use the league for its own purposes. They were the dominant naval power, and honestly they treated their allies less like partners and more like subjects. If a city tried to leave the league, Athens would use the league's own fleet to attack and subjugate it. They moved the treasury from Delos to Athens and began using the money to fund their own magnificent building projects, including the Parthenon. The Delian League had transformed into the Athenian Empire. Athens was growing rich and powerful, entering a so-called golden age of culture, democracy, and influence under the leadership of the great statesman Pericles. Sparta watched this development with deep alarm. They had retreated back into their isolated world in the Peloponnese after the Persian Wars. They had their own alliance, the Peloponnesian League, which was much older and more traditional. It was a defensive alliance of land-based powers, led by Sparta, but with more respect for the independence of its members. Sparta and its allies looked at the rise of Athens with a mixture of envy and fear. They saw Athens as an aggressive, expansionist power, a tyrant city whose democratic ideas threatened the oligarchic governments favored by Sparta. The eagle was flying too high. The fragile unity of the Persian Wars was shattering. The Greek world was slowly dividing into two camps, two great power blocks. One was centered around Athens, a maritime empire, democratic and dynamic. The other was centered around Sparta, a land-based league, oligarchic and conservative. The tension between them grew year after year. Small disputes between their respective allies became major diplomatic incidents. A cold war descended upon Greece, filled with suspicion, proxy conflicts, and an escalating arms race. The stage was being set for a new conflict, one that would not be against a foreign invader, but Greek against Greek. In 431 BCE, the Peloponnesian War began, a conflict that would last for nearly 3 decades and tear the Greek world apart. Sparta, with its unmatched army, faced Athens with its invincible navy. The Spartan strategy was to march into Attica each year, burning farms and trying to lure the Athenian army out for a decisive battle. The Athenian strategy, devised by Pericles, was one of patience. He ordered the people to take refuge inside the long walls, while the Athenian navy kept the city supplied and raided the coast of the Peloponnese. The war became a contest of endurance, a war of opposing philosophies. The first years saw only destruction and growing bitterness. Pericles' strategy was clever, but it had a terrible, unforeseen consequence. Crowding the entire population of Attica inside the city walls created a perfect breeding ground for disease. In the second year of the war, a devastating plague broke out in Athens. It was a horrific sickness that killed with terrifying speed. The city became a living hell of fever, death, and despair. It killed nearly a third of the population, including soldiers, sailors, and even Pericles himself. The plague shattered Athenian morale and weakened their ability to fight, but still they did not surrender. The war dragged on, fueled by hatred. After a decade of fighting, both sides were exhausted. They signed a fragile peace treaty, but it did not last. The ambition and arrogance, the hubris of Athens had grown too great. A new generation of leaders, more reckless than Pericles, came to power. They convinced the Athenian assembly to undertake a bold and dangerous new venture, a massive military expedition to conquer the powerful city of Syracuse on the island of Sicily. They dreamed of adding Sicily to their empire, gaining immense wealth and resources that would allow them to finally crush Sparta. It was an enormous gamble, a roll of the dice for total victory. The Sicilian expedition was a catastrophe. The Athenians underestimated the strength of Syracuse and its allies, which included Spartan commanders and reinforcements. The campaign bogged down into a long, difficult siege. The Athenian forces were eventually trapped, their escape route by sea blocked. In a series of desperate naval battles in the great harbor of Syracuse, the once mighty Athenian navy was utterly destroyed. The surviving soldiers tried to flee overland, but were hunted down, captured, or killed. Tens of thousands of Athenians, the flower of their youth, perished far from home. The news of the disaster in Sicily sent a shockwave through the Greek world. It was a blow from which Athens would never fully recover. Their treasury was empty, their navy was crippled, and their most experienced soldiers and sailors were dead. Sparta, smelling blood, renewed the war with vigor, now funded by Persian gold. The final phase of the war began, but the balance of power had shifted decisively. The great Athenian whale had been harpooned. The long, tragic struggle for the soul of Greece was entering its final, bloody act, and the shadow of Spartan victory was now falling over the once bright city of Athens. The Sicilian disaster sealed Athens' fate. The war dragged on, a desperate struggle. The city's spirit was broken. Sparta challenged Athens at sea. The last Athenian fleet was destroyed. The city's lifeline was cut. Starved into submission, Athens surrendered in 404 BCE. The great Peloponnesian War was over. Sparta stood victorious, but it was a victory that came at a terrible price. The war left Greece shattered. The golden age of Greece was over. This weakness left Greece vulnerable. To the north, a new power was rising in Macedon. They swept down and conquered the lands. The age of the independent polis was over. It was a tragic paradox. Sparta and Athens had destroyed the very world they sought to lead. The sun had set on classical Greece. Though their cities fell, the legacies of Sparta and Athens did not die. They became ideas that have shaped the world for more than 2,000 years. They represent two timeless opposing poles of human society. Sparta and Athens. Sparta stands for the power of the state, for order, discipline, and the collective good. Athens stands for the power of the individual, for freedom, creativity, and reason. They gave us the vocabulary for our politics and our philosophy. How do we balance the needs of the state with the rights of the individual? The ghosts of the Spartan soldier and the Athenian philosopher still whisper in our ears. Their story teaches us that neither extreme is enough on its own. It tells us that a healthy society needs both the shield and the mind. Their tale is not just history, it is a mirror in which we can see ourselves.